We're finally going to decide it. Eustace, Captain Kidd versus Trafalgar D Waterlaw. Who is the strongest member out of these two rivals? These two men have been at each other's throat ever since they were introduced in the Saba-Odi Archipelago arc. Yes, they and Luffy are a trio of rivals, but Luffy's really kind of, stepped ahead of them a little bit, and Law and Kid have kind of been left to their own devices of kind of hating each other, always trying to get a one-up on each other. And in the fandom, these two men have always been compared to each other. Now, a little bit of inside knowledge, if you will. When Oda created the supernovas, Kid was the one that he thought was going to get the main attention from the fan base. He was the one that he designed and thought, yeah, he's it. He's the moneymaker. He's the one we're going to roll with as kind of the biggest main attraction outside of Blackbeard, Luffy, and Zoro. However, the fans really, really took to Law, and it showed. And this is just pure conjecture on my part here, but I think Oda may have seen the fan support, or at least the editors of Oda have seen this, and kind of wanted him to push Law to be, a bigger main attraction than what he might have originally intended for him. Now, this is an important talking point, because out of these two men, out of Kid and Law is it too far to say significantly more popular than Kid? He certainly was before Onigashima, but since Wano, Kid seems to be getting a little bit more love, where Law is still more popular, without question. But Kid, he's getting his flowers a little bit. People are starting to come around to him a little bit more. To be fair, after the events of what happens after Wano with Kid's character, who knows, maybe everyone kind of just saw a sinking ship and kind of left it, and the love for Law has increased even more potentially, especially with how after Wano, where Law goes compared to where Kid goes, it's kind of, unless Oda's planning on showing some real big character development from Kid, we may already have our answer of who is the strongest character out of these two. However, that is not enough, in an anime YouTube community, when we talk about these characters, sometimes the stronger character is the one that isn't actually being pushed as hard as the other character. And it's also important to know, this isn't a video of who is the most powerful. Now, I've just did a couple days ago a video ranking all of the supernova. I'll chuck it up on screen. Heavily suggest going to go give that one a watch. And if you watch it, you'll see who I think is the more powerful one. But power doesn't always correlate to who will win in a matchup. Because we have there's a lot of different avenues, a lot of different systems that go into two characters versing each other. Sometimes the powerful character gets kind of hard stomped by the other character because they have the tools necessary to counter the stronger character. So even though I have given a placement in that video, I do reckon it's not so cut and dry as what that video may have suggested, and I do want to explore the more intimate side of Kid versus Law. Now, the first thing we need to get into before we touch on their Devil Fruit powers, where the main brunt of this video is going to be, let's go over a few statistics for them. Let's go over physical strength, speed, durability/endurance, and intelligence, battle IQ. We want to get these four out of the way because they might be less flashy compared to the Devil Fruits. We'll also talk about Haki as well, but it is still a talking point that needs to be addressed. I think that Eustace Kid outscales Law in terms of physical strength. We see everything that he can do in prison with Luffy carrying these massive building level stones with one hand without any kind of effort at all. And with how a lot of his techniques revolve around things like, he's not holding the burden of the metal that he summons, because that's with the magnetic powers, but he's still throwing around all these kind of massive steel fists. He's still kind of showing to be kind of more physically dominant than Law would be. It's important to note that Kid is a close to mid-range fighter, while Law is a mid to long-range fighter who isn't afraid to get close and get scrappy. That's an important aspect to think of when we're looking at these two characters. Now, speed. I'm going to throw speed out the window here because it's not really relevant in this matchup. Law has his ability of shambles, which allows him to essentially use the substitution jutsu, where he is switching himself out with other items. Meaning it's a version of teleportation, which makes speed kind of irrelevant in this matchup. Now, evasion is an important aspect of Kid's character, which we'll get into, given his ability to levitate through his devil fruit powers. But sheer travel speed and reaction speed isn't really necessary for this video. Now, endurance. Both men have insane amounts of endurance and durability. Both in Wano were taking immense damages from Kaido and Big Mom, and then still kind of got up and then had their own clash with Big Mom in a 2v1 fight. Law, before this, we see has some insane endurance feats with how his heart gets crushed, how he can fight Doflamingo and take some of his more powerful attacks head on. Kid also has been imprisoned in Udon for so long, yet still having the stamina and endurance to keep going and keep pushing himself and keep doing these heavy lifting training exercises that he does with Luffy. I am going to nudge it to Kid that he has more stamina and more endurance, just because in that fight with Big Mom, Kid is also getting damaged through Hawkins, making him a substitute puppet for every time Killer hurts Hawkins. So Kid is literally being taken apart by two different factors, one completely outside of his control and something that he couldn't even brace for. So I do think in terms of endurance and durability, that Kid kind of slightly nudges Law out, but you can't, it's not a stomp, I guess you could say. Law does have some very impressive endurance feats, and that can't be overlooked, but I would kind of give it to Kid in that way. Now, in terms of battle IQ, the same level of closeness, but I'm going to nudge it out to Law. The reason I say this is because Kid might not seem very sharp on the surface, but he's like Luffy. When it comes to battle, he has an amazing battle IQ where he's a genius when he's, in battle. A little bit like Bakugo from My Hero Academia has a similar thing where we see, and they truly pronounce it, like what a genius level IQ he has in battle. I reckon Eustace Captain Kid has it, and I reckon Law has it as well. The difference is Law is able to keep his cool much better than Kid, and the only time we see Law ever really kind of, not cool, calm, and collected is with things with Doflamingo, where there's a lot of emotional turmoil going on. But we do these fights as if they were in a Roman Colosseum, one-on-one type of thing. And as much as they have a rivalry, Law wouldn't let himself get kind of baited into or provoked into kind of getting sloppy, while Law could definitely make Kid do that, I reckon. Kid also comes into this fight with a little bit of overconfidence, and that is something that I think Law would be able to kind of make the best of and kind of potentially use that to Kid's disadvantage. So in terms of those four kind of, base stats, that's where I think Law would be, that's where I think both of them would kind of be hit and miss. Kid for strength and endurance, a tie for speed because it doesn't really matter. Potentially you could give it to Law just because he's teleporting. And battle IQ and strategic intellect to Law. So they're very even there. They're very kind of even. They're kind of balancing each other out through each other's faults. But where do they stand in Devil Fruit power? Very, very interesting matchup. Law is considered to have the ultimate Devil Fruit, and it's certainly more versatile than Kid, But Kid's lets him fight close range and mid range, and even long range if he has to. So that's a very kind of versatile fruit as well. Lots of different things he can do with it, from armor to giant metal fists to giant iron metal kaiju monsters, to being able to trap people in prisons, to being able to use his awakening ability and turn someone into a magnet themselves. While Law can do things like cut through essentially anything we haven't really seen the limits to it. His highest feat is cutting through an entire mountain. In terms of destruction, that is like being mountain level, and that was in Punk Hazard, a much like weaker lore. He has the best kind of attack power feat out of the two of them. Now, he can also do things like teleport, like we mentioned. He can do things like injection shots, which are kind of projectile internal damage mid-range abilities. He can swap people's personalities, which won't become a factor in this fight because it's one-on-one. He can do things like use the Gamma Knife to destroy your insides. He can use stuff like his awakening ability to use a Shock Willy to destroy you from the inside as well, but he can do that while penetrating through your external defenses as well. With the Gamma Knife, he still needs to get through the internal defense to get into and do as much damage as possible to your internals. So they've both got a wide range of abilities, but how will these clash against each other? And their most basic abilities with their Devil Fruits are kind of getting counteracted by each other, and I reckon that's why this is a good matchup. Because a kid will be throwing down his, metal fist, his punk Gibsons and punk Rottens and stuff like that. No, punk Rottens is his ultimate attack. I get kids' abilities confused in my head. The massive goddamn Luffy's kind of massive fist techniques that kid has, goddamn shadow boxing here in front of the camera. But he can throw them out. He can throw out massive kind of projectiles of just metal objects. Very, very deadly in mid-range. He can use his Punk Gibson, I think it is, where he creates a skull and fists. He can then shoot off projectiles once again. However, as much as these projectiles might be coming in, as much as these fists might be raining down on Law, we've seen that he can cut through a mountain. So with his ability to cut through objects, we've kind of out-limit from what we've seen. These metal projectiles are just going to be completely sliced apart, making it a little bit redundant for Kid to kind of go in mid-range and fire off these projectiles, because Law is able to just as easily kind of cut through them. You could also maybe make an argument that in Law's room, if you're watching this video, I'm not even going to explain it. I reckon you all know what Law's room is. A film of energy around him where he uses all his abilities. In this room, he can have a version of telekinesis. You could argue that he could also potentially telekinetically kind of just move the objects away from him before they get too close. However, I could also see the argument that Kid has more control over those objects thanks to his electromagnetism. Even in Law's room, he would have more control over being able to manipulate them. Either way, I think Law is pretty safe with his slashing defenses of being able to cut through all metal projections that are thrown at him. However, those slashes of Law's aren't really getting to Kid either because of Kid's evasion. Because he can blitz around the battlefield levitating himself, it makes it really difficult for Law to be able to get a direct hit on Kid. Kid and Law, why can one of them not have not a three-letter name? I keep getting them confused. But Kid's able to kind of float around the sky, dodging all these slashes, firing back with his metal projections and metal fists, and Law is able to then cut them apart. So they're kind of at a stalemate, which I think is really cool given their kind of base Devil Fruit abilities. Now, one thing that Kid really needs to be aware of is Law's ability to teleport. Kid's ability to use all these different metal objects from his surroundings is quite limiting to himself with how Law can use those different objects around him to teleport and get behind Kid. So Kid is going to have to be really, really careful of that. However, it's not just an instant win by Law, because the minute that Law puts himself in that position, he opens himself up to some serious counterattacks that can do a lot of damage. Kid is definitely more powerful close range, and he can get the W over Law if Law's not careful. So he needs to be, have certainty that he can kind of get behind him with a Gamma Knife to really kind of try and take Kid out. Kid can also summon the metal around him to protect himself from things like Gamma Knife, meaning Law might have to use his sword to actually, cut through the defense and try and take Kid out that way. But the minute Law brings his sword out close range, he's also limiting his close range abilities by bringing in such a long katana. And bringing in a katana that Kid can control to some degree. Meaning they're kind of at a stalemate here as well, because of the defenses that Kid can have by summoning the metal around him to protect himself from things like counter shock and gamma knife, and then also being able to potentially fire back at Law, and Law then being vulnerable. It brings off a huge kind of stalemate of styles between these two men. And I think that, not just ironically, but also cinematically, I think that this fight is really kind of brought down to their awakened abilities. Because I'm going to come out and say it right now. I don't think that Kid has anything in his arsenal that can beat Law through just his base Devil Fruit powers. Now, yes, I think that if he could hit him with the Punk Rotten Railgun technique, that if it didn't kill Law, could seriously do some damage to him. However, that technique has a little bit of build-up to use, and I think that Law might be able to... Law's too quick and too evasive thanks to his teleportation for Kid to be able to get a direct hit on him. We know that through his fight with Shanks, which we'll touch on in a little bit, that he can bring objects, magnetic objects, kind of to him. So against other opponents and other objects, the railgun is really deadly. But with Law himself, he can't be pulled into the ray of the railgun with just Kid's base abilities. So I don't think the railgun would work on Law, with the exception of if Kid is able to hit him with his awakened assign ability. Now, this is kind of devastating to Law, because it turns Law into a magnet where all metal objects in the surroundings kind of attract to him and crush him. Now, Law doesn't have the durability that Big Mom has, so he might not survive this attack if he gets hit with it full on. However, Law can also defend himself through the ability to kind of cut through the objects as they're coming. Now, the teleportation that he's been using before this, in this fight, won't really be a factor. Assign is a hard counter to it, because he's not dodging an ability. He is now the impact zone of the ability, so he can't run away from it, meaning all he can do is defend himself from all the steel projectiles flying at him indefinitely. Now, I reckon he would be able to keep himself away from getting truly trapped by it. I will also mention the cube that Kid can trap people in, totally irrelevant, because obviously Law can teleport out. But while I think he can kind of, like, if he does get stuck a little bit, he'd be able to cut himself away from it. What it does do is that it opens Kid up to being able to target Law with the railgun ability. Because of the distraction necessary from the assign ability, I do think that Law, there is potential and there are outcomes where Law can hit... sorry. I really apologize if I've been going back and forth with these names. I really hope you can understand who I'm trying to reference here. But I reckon that Kid will be able to get a Railgun Punk Rotten attack in on Law, thanks to the help of his assign ability. I think logically it makes sense that he would be able to get that done. However, we need to look at what Law can do here, because by using his awakened ability himself, his K-Room, he's eliminating the need to kind of hit Kid externally. He can go through all his defenses like his weapon was intangible, and then use Shock Willy and destroy Kid from the inside. Now, it all comes down to how you think these two abilities would match up against each other. I think it's very fair to say that Law would probably be able to hit Kid with the Shock Willy much quicker and much more numerously than Kid would be able to hit Law with a Punk Rotten, which I think is important. Because he eliminates the need of having to attack him externally, it allows him to attack from not just mid, not just close not just mid, but also long range. Meaning that, and with how quick it is, I think you'd be able to get that if they both went awakened at the same time. Even if Kid was able to get the assign ability on Law quicker than Law could attack him, it still takes some time for all the metal objects to come and crush Law. And we've already established it wouldn't crush him, meaning it would take even longer to build up an opening for for Kid to get the railgun technique off. Even more of time delay because the railgun itself isn't an instantaneous attack. Meaning, I think that Law would be able to get his Shock Willy off on Kid before Kid could get his kind of fatal blow on Law, which would kind of lead us more to think Law would win this matchup. Just off sheer headcanon, I would say that I think that Kid could survive a Shock Willy with more, and the more powerful version of Shock Willy that he did to Big Mom. He's more likely to survive that than Law is being able to survive a railgun technique. I think through some shenanigans and some headcanon that Kid could take a Shock Willy, kind of blood goes everywhere, he stumbles back and then kind of picks himself up and continues on the fight a little bit, severely injured. But I still reckon he could kind of keep the fight going, and maybe through Law thinking he got the victory, maybe he could get, trapped very briefly from the metal projectiles, and then Law hit him with a railgun, which I think would probably do more damage to Law, simply for the fact of, even if you judge the power of both attacks, Shock Willy and railgun, evenly, I think that Law has less durability and endurance than Kid, so it might affect him more. But that's mere conjecture and a lot of headcanon. So it's hard to... it's a bit... I don't want to sound like I'm sitting on the fence with it, because I'm not. I do think if I had to put money on it, if I was a betting man, I would give the odds to Law. I would probably give it 60 to 70 versus 30 to 40% in Law's favor. I do think, though, if these men clash 10 times, I don't think Law is beating him each time out of 10. I think there are some scenarios where Kid can get the win on Law, and that Law needs to be really, really careful in terms of that assign ability and not getting too trapped by the steel beams that Kid is throwing at him. Now, in terms of Haki, I think that observation and armament, we have no reason to believe that they're not just equal. Either way, there's no feats to suggest one is greater than the other. Conqueror's Haki, we know Kid does have in the anime. Once again, not canon to the manga, but he does show it in the anime. Does Law show Conqueror's Haki? I'm completely blanking on that. I'm really showing a lapse in One Piece knowledge here. I'm tempted to cut here and to go look at that up myself. Either way, I'm not going to. I might include it in the comments just to correct myself if I was right or wrong. The reason I'm not going to kind of rehash this video here is because, one, Kid's Conqueror's Haki isn't even canon. Even if it was, we don't see... we just see kind of amplifying his attacks a little bit. I don't think it would be enough to beat Law, because it's not like it's giving him some way to attack Law instantaneously, which is what his problem was, and what Law's kind of benefit and advantage was over the fight. It would just make his attacks more powerful, which won't really change the outcome. If it does, it just goes from like a 70-30 win to a 60-40 type of thing. And if Law does have Conqueror's Haki, it's not so much more powerful than Kid's. They would kind of just be even, and it would just give us back to the 60-40 win rate. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's how I reckon the fight would go. I reckon it's really, really interesting in the sense of I reckon Law is more powerful than Kid. I'm going to spoil it. I say that in my video. I reckon Law is more powerful. You need to go see where I actually rank them. Because it's not so kind of cut and dry as that. But their abilities are a great clash against each other, and that's why I wanted to talk about it, kind of just envisioning how the fight would go in my head. I think what I've kind of, said tonight, it could be of course, it's not could be, it's entirely subjective, but I think I've made some decent enough arguments on why it would go that way, how they counter each other, and how it would come down to their awakened abilities, which I think is really, really cool. I said I would touch on it. I'm just going to spend a minute on it real quick. Kid goes and fights Law. He gets one-shotted by... Kid goes and fights Shanks, and he gets one-shotted by him. Law goes and fights Blackbeard and does a much better. He's even able to injure Blackbeard. You know, yes, you could say Shanks is just so much stronger than Blackbeard. I don't reckon his strength is so much stronger that they're in a different tier. I think they're still kind of relative to each other, even if you do give it to Shanks. Kid's just kind of overconfidence and arrogance just proved him so detrimental, where Shanks just took him down with one blow, which is insane. And Law just performs so much better. So I reckon narratively that just gives us the confirmation that Law is more powerful. But once again, what we discussed in the beginning of this video, power does not equate to beating someone in a verse battle. So I'm glad I've got this video on the channel that I can always go back and reference of where I think these two are in a fight against each other. If you've liked this video, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It's been a treat making it. Have a lovely night, everyone.